Hey guys, you guys hear me? I can't see anybody. Please can hear me.
We can hear you. I just have somebody else over here who's like uber talkative.
Yay. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and get started then. We are covering high performance habit number 5 in Brendan Burchard's book, and it is about developing influence. I really like this chapter. This is one of the areas where I scored highest on, so I felt like a lot of it really kind of spoke to me and made me feel like I'm doing some things right. There are some things that I definitely can improve on though, so that's good. All right, so in the beginning of the chapter, he's talking about he's on a flight with Juan, who is a CEO of a clothing company, and they have been not doing well at all financially. His company hasn't. For 7 quarters in a row, they have had poor performance. And so he's talking to the CEO and asking, okay, so what do you think the problem is? Why are you seeing poor performance? Why is your company not doing well? It is Daniela's fault. She is their chief designer, and she's come into the company fairly recently. And he says that they've been butting heads. Basically, she is pushing for change, and about half of his team is kind of siding with her. And it sounds to me what it boils down to is he doesn't want change, and Shirley doesn't want what she is presenting to the team. So since she started, again, their team has kind of split in half. Half have gone with her, and half have stayed on his side, and their revenues have tanked. So he's telling the story. Juan is telling Brendan the story, and he says, okay, you need to tell me how I handle her. And he's like, whoa, wait a minute. And so he quotes John Wooden and says, you handle things, you collaborate with people. So we're not going to handle her. We're going to figure out how you can influence her. And Juan doesn't hear what he says. He just keeps on going on and on about how he wants to limit her influence and further his own ideas. And Brendan says, okay, this is not what I'm all about. He, says it's obviously never a good thing when a leader is blaming their people for poor performance and seeking to control people through individual demoralization. So basically, Juan is wanting to shut Daniela down, put her in her place, and have her do exactly what he wants her to do. And so Brendan asks him, is this what you want? You want you and Daniela to continue to fight until she quits and tarnishes your brand and half of your team leaves with her? Is that what you really want? And he's like, well, no, I guess that's not really what I want. And so Brendan says, so what do you want then? And Juan says he wants her to play nicer, which Brendan says, okay, but so you just want her to agree with you and do everything that you say? And Juan says, well, is that really that bad of a thing? And he was serious. So Brendan tries to get Juan to understand that people don't want to work for a boss that can't see beyond themselves, a boss that just wants to be a dictator and tell them what to do and not listen to what they have to say. When somebody has no say in something, then they don't have any. There's nothing in it for them. So why would they want to do that? So Brendan is asking Juan all these questions about, well, what did you promise her when she started? What did you see in her when you hired her? Because you must have seen some good things if you hired her. And so Juan starts to say, he promised her this flat growth. But then he feels like she took advantage of that and then just took over with her vision and threw his vision to the wayside. So the CFO, who's also in the meeting, says, see, now you see we're just stuck. We don't know where to go from here. And I love this quote. Brendan says, no one is ever stuck. They've just lost perspective. So Brendan tries to give one perspective. And he says, so what do you think she wants? And Juan says she wants to take over the company. And Brendan says, okay, so she's not here, so we don't know for sure, but let's assume that she does want to. So how are we going to help you have influence over her so that we can help fuel her fire and help her to continue, or to help your company be so you guys can work together? And he says, you need to raise her ambition, help her to rise up, challenge her to rise, instead of trying to squash her. And Juan's like, whoa, wait a minute. You think I should just let her take over the company? And Brendan basically says no. Basically, I want you to be able to have more influence over her, so that you can rise her up and you guys can be successful together. So then he starts talking about how do you develop influence. And he tells me that you may not have started out well in this relationship, in this business partnership, but you can start now. You can start to be a better leader to her and your team, and do it better this time than you did the first time around. So, if you feel like you haven't been a good leader to your team thus far, it's okay. You can start over. You can start today. You can start to implement these things, and become the best leader that you can. So, okay. So, what causes influence? What things do we do or don't we do that cause influence over others? And Brendan says that a sense of giving is not something that helps us to have influence over others. But having influence is strongly correlated with feeling like you make a difference. So if you're just giving and not feeling like you are making a difference, then you're not going to be influential. But if you are, feeling like your efforts are making an impact, then that will help you to be influential. That'll, make you feel like you're making an impact on people, and people will see that you're trying to make an impact. He also says that creativity is not strongly correlated with influence, simply because just because you're creative doesn't mean that you have people skills. And of course, you've got to have people to be influential. But things that can improve your influence, one is your perception of yourself. So if you believe that you're influential, if you believe that you're successful and you're high performing, then people around you are going to believe that too. If you carry yourself in a confident manner and you believe those things about yourself, then that is often correlated to other people seeing that in you. He says, if you have more influence, then it is going to improve your life. So even practical everyday things like your kids listening to what you have to say, you're able to resolve conflicts faster if you are over other people. You often get more buy-in for your ideas. You make more sales. You're more successful. He also says you're more likely to be a successfully self-employed person, which is what we're all trying to do, right? So besides that, let's see. Oh, so he says that something that does not have a connection to influence is, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. He said he sees a lot of people a lot of times that say they can't be successful because they're not an extrovert. There's no way that they can be influential because they're not an extrovert. And he says, actually, even introverts can be super influential, which is good news for me. So, yeah, just because you're not an extrovert doesn't mean you can't be influential. Okay, so the next section is on page 222, influence basics. Okay, someone put something in the chat. Good news for Sarah, too. I was almost going to say that. Okay, so influence basics. So what is influence? Basically, it's the ability to shape other people's beliefs and behaviors as you desire. And he says that, okay, so he talks about how a lot of the high performance habits that he's talked about, such as seeking clarity and your level of energy, those are things that you can control. They're very easy for you to control. You can command those. You can, figure out how to get those. And he says, even with influence, there is more and more research showing that you really do have a lot of control of how people perceive you and ultimately how much influence you have over them. So what can you do to gain that influence? One of the first things is to ask. This is probably one of the things that I struggled with the most in the past, but I'm getting better at it as I practice it. So, and that's what he says. The more you do it, the better you're going to get at it. He said a lot of people struggle with asking for what they want, and they underestimate the willingness of others to engage and help. He says that several studies showed that people tend to say yes over 3 times as often as people thought they would. And then he said that people also overestimate how often or to what degree others will judge you. So this, I think, is huge in our businesses with messaging people, with posting about Plexus, and again, with messaging people about Plexus, because we are going to, how many times have you messaged somebody that you're sure will say no, or maybe you think they'll judge you, so you don't want to message them? They're kind of chickenless because you're just sure what their opinion will be. And then you do message them and they say yes, or they're interested in more info, or they are supportive even if maybe they don't want to try their products. That's happened to me so many times. I've been so surprised by people's responses, and that's exactly what he's telling us, that we are going to assume people are going to say no, and they're going to say yes 3 times as often as we expect them to. And then they're probably not going to be judging us as harshly as we think they are. We're our own worst critics, right? So basically, he says you never know until you ask. So part of gaining that influence is simply learning to make a lot of requests and getting better at making those requests. So again, practice makes perfect. The more you do it, the easier it gets, the better you get at it. Okay. He also says, and this goes back to what we said a little bit before, but people often let the fear of judgment or rejection prevent them from speaking up, asking for help, or trying to lead. And the sad thing is they're usually wrong. So again, we can't let that fear of judgment or rejection hold us back from reaching out, because as he says here, he says, I understand you worry what others think. This is on page 223. But if no one has ever said it to you, here you go. Those people aren't thinking about you at all. And even when you put yourself in front of them to make a request and they say no, within a minute, they're right back to not thinking about you. They're not sitting there judging you. They're too busy dealing with their own life. So you might as well get on with it and ask. Otherwise, you've set aside your dreams for judgments that probably don't even exist. That one hit me hard. So if you're not reaching out to people because you're afraid that they're going to judge you or reject you, then you are setting aside your dreams for judgments that probably don't even exist. that one really hit me. So we've got to be bold. We've got to be brave and just do it. He also says that people tend to actually even like you more after they've done something for you. So asking somebody for a favor actually causes more affinity between the two of you. So again, if you have a special or you're shooting for a huge goal, asking somebody if they would support you or they're interested in helping you reach that goal is actually more likely to bond you more than it is to turn that person off, which I don't know about you, but that I know a lot of people have that fear that if they're reaching out to these people about a big goal or something, that it might turn them off or push them away. But really, they tend to be more, again, it says like you even more if you just ask. Also, another mistake he says people make is asking just once and quitting. The more you ask and share your ideas, the more people become familiar and comfortable with your requests, and the more they start to like the idea. So again, this is why posting consistently, messaging consistently, following up consistently, talking to your friends and family in person consistently is important. Obviously, we don't want everything always all the time to be about Plexus, but showing people that you're serious about it and putting it in front of them multiple times is going to make them more comfortable and familiar with it and more open to the idea. He says, great leaders ask a lot of questions because people support what they create. So people are going to be more interested in an idea or helping you with something or, whatever, if they have some input versus it being solely, your idea. So asking lots of questions, this can be used with your teams, ask them lots of questions, having them do, brainstorm and asking for their opinion rather than just dictating, this is what we're going to do without asking for their thoughts. And then he says, this is applicable to all aspects of your life. With your spouse, with your kids, with other people in the community. It's not just related to your job. Okay, so on page 225, he says, give and you shall receive. So we learned earlier that just giving does not increase your influence. But, giving to others with no expectation of return does help your success. It can double your ability to influence others if you give something before you ask for something. High performers tend to have a giving mindset, but mostly because they are looking to help others. So good things that you can give to people, the greatest thing that you can give to people, he says, is giving them trust, giving them autonomy, helping, again, letting them help in that decision-making process, making them feel important, like you value their opinion, because you do, right? He says some people that are new achievers worry about giving burnout. They're feel like they're already stressed and exhausted, and so they don't want to give too much because they're afraid that they'll burn out. But he says that's usually not the case. And if you feel that way, he says, go back to the habits on energy and productivity. And if you master those, then you won't have that burnt out feeling. All right, page 226, be a champion of people. So this is all about praising people. This is all about making people feel valued. He says about half of employed adults feel valued by their employer. I can tell you, I don't feel valued by my employer, my pharmacy employer. And that's one of the things I love about Plexus. I feel valued here, which, makes me more motivated. It makes me happier and, will keep me sticking around, right? So he says the opposite is true too. So if you don't feel appreciated, you don't feel valued, then you're not going to be motivated. You're going to have low morale. You're going to perform less. You're not going to perform as well. So basically, he says, make people feel appreciated, praise them, give them respect, show them, that you are grateful for them. He says, if you're the one who appreciates people the most, then you will be most appreciated by people. And he encourages public praise as well, which is another thing that I love about Lexus. Giving each other shout outs, making somebody feel good, and having their peers see that, I think is awesome. Alrighty, page 227, the difference makers. So he encourages us to think of two people who have positively influenced us the most in our lives. I was able to think of my two pretty easily. One was my dad, and one was a professor that I had during my rotations in pharmacy school. And so I went through and answered these questions on page 227 about or what they did for me to feel like they made a big influence on my life. So I encourage you guys to do the same thing. He said that people who positively influence other people do three different things. And this is the ultimate influence model that's on page 229. So first, they shape how we think. Second, they challenge us in some way. So they call us out on our stuff. They raise our ambitions to be a better person, have better relationships. And third, they serve as role models. So that first practice, teach people how they think, starts on page 229. And he says, some of the things that you might say to somebody if you are trying to help them in this aspect is, you would say, think of it this way, or what do you think about this? What would happen if we tried this? So when you're saying those kinds of things, you are helping people learn or guiding them on how to think. So an example that he gives is an 8-year-old child who says, I hate homework. So basically he says, how can you ask questions to help that child to understand the value of homework, to understand that if she does a good job on that homework, it's a reflection of her. And so he has a lot of good questions there on the bottom of page 230. All right. So then he encourages us to think about someone that we want to influence and how we can shape their thinking. He says, before we meet with these people, before we try to influence these people, we need to ask ourselves 3 questions. How do we want them to think about themselves? How do we want them to think about other people? And how do we want them to think about the world at large? Sorry. My throat is itchy. So those are 3 things that are really important for us to think about if we're trying to influence somebody. Learning how to think is the next part. In this section, he talks about who has influenced him the most, who has shaped his perceptions of himself, others, and the world as a whole. And he says his parents have. He tells a story about how their heater broke one year and they couldn't afford to fix it for a week until his dad got paid. And he said, some places it might not be a big deal, but where we lived, it would get down to negative 20 degrees. So it's a pretty big deal. But his mom made the best of it. She brought tents into the living room and put sleeping bags in there and all these blankets. And so they just camped out in the living room. They made this fun thing that the kids even bragged about to their friends. So this could have been a really, sad time for people or for the kids and the parents. but they turned it into something positive that was enjoyable for the kids. So they turned adversity into a good time. So he said, you know, that was a huge impact on how he viewed the world. And he said that his parents also helped him figure out they led by example how to treat others with compassion. His dad worked at the DMV. We all know how frustrating it can be to go to the DMV. You know, they're always busy, understaffed, we have to wait in line, you know, all those things. So he talks about how horrible people were to his dad and how he saw them. He even saw somebody spit on his dad at one point. And how his dad always responded with kindness. His dad always tried to make people laugh. After one of his dad's employees was treated poorly, he would whisper words of encouragement to them. So even though he was treated poorly and his staff was treated poorly and they were understaffed and all of that, he always just brought light to the situation. He said that he always tried to put himself in other people's shoes, because he knew that people were mostly good and caring, but if they're in a hurry or things don't go their way, then they might be dismissive or rude, but he still gave them the benefit of the doubt. And Brendan says his dad taught him that, even if someone treats me poorly, that I should meet them with patience and humor. He also talks about how his mom was very positive and joyous and energized, despite a poor childhood and the fact that the people that she worked with were really mean to her. She was from Vietnam, and English was like her third language, and the people at work were just mean to her because of it. They belittled her and made her feel like she was less than because of the language barrier. But despite all that, she still treated everybody with compassion. She still tried to help other people in need and tried to bring light to other people's lives and she still was this, super joyous person despite all of that negativity that she dealt with. He says that his parents trusted in the goodness of others in general and showed him that with patience, grace, and humor, people could open up, change, and be friendly. So the whole, kill them with kindness thing, this is definitely something that, a skill that I've developed working in the pharmacy. And it's a great skill to have, to be able to leave somebody better than what they were when they encountered you that day. The practice, too, is to challenge people to grow. He says high achievers are constantly challenging others to raise the bar. They push people to get better, and they don't apologize for it. He says, it's not about confrontation. It's about giving people positively framed challenges to motivate them to do better. He said, of course, your intent and tone matter. If you're trying to diminish others or you're being condescending, then that's not going to, it's not going to come across well. That's not going to be met with, motivating the other person. But if you're speaking to them with honor and respect, then you're going to be able to inspire better action from them. He says, however, even if you're great at communication, some people just won't like it, but that has to be a price that you're willing to pay in order to gain real influence. He said, people are afraid that challenging others will lead to conflict, but he said, really, that's not typically true. If you're dealing with a high performer, they're going to expect that from you. High performers love challenges, and he said, this really hit me too, page 239. He says, facing challenge is a huge part of what high performers do well and want to do well. Don't deny them that by being hesitant to issue the challenge. So if you're not willing to challenge somebody, then you could be actually holding them back and keeping them from meeting their full potential. Which speaks to the yellow in me, because a lot of this, being challenging people and things like that, as a yellow is kind of scary, right? But if you think of it that way, that you're really hindering them by not challenging them, then hopefully that'll help some of you yellows out there too. So things that you can challenge people, things that he encourages you to challenge. One is people's character. And that means giving them feedback, direction, and high expectations of their values. So making sure that they're sticking to their values, the important values like honesty, integrity, responsibility, hard work, persistence. And by doing this, you're going to be giving them a supportive, helpful gift. This is what my professor that I talked about earlier, what he did for me. He really challenged me to do more and be better. I was, doing well in my rotations, but I wasn't really giving it my all because his rotation was a hospital-based rotation, and I myself thought I would end up, I didn't foresee myself ending up in that type of setting. And so I, didn't, put as much effort into it as I could have. And he saw potential in me and encouraged me to, seek out a residency and do other things to further my knowledge, and really pushed me, which was hard at the time, but I really appreciated it. Okay, so another thing that you can challenge people on is their connections. So their connections with others, their relationships, how they treat people and add value to other people. So he says high performers don't let bad behavior slide. They don't let the people on their team treat others with disrespect or not treat others well. So they often say things that encourage people to treat other people well. So listening to each other, treating others with respect, that type of thing. Okay. The next thing that you can challenge people on is their contribution. And this is basically just challenging them to add more value or to be more generous. And so one area or one thing that this can lead to is creativity and innovation. So encouraging them to be creative and contribute ideas that might help to make the future better, help the team to grow, help the employees to feel more appreciated. He says that the important part here is to challenge individuals specifically and not as a group. So you're going to individualize this. This is not something that's going to be a one-size-fits-all approach. You can't just send out a mass message to everybody and expect that they're going to rise to this challenge. It's going to be more effective if you are doing it on a one-to-one basis. Okay, so then he talks, I'm trying to hurry here, guys. Sorry, this is a lot, or there's a lot of meat in this. So on page 242, he talks about his challenge, what he went through, and who influenced him in that situation. So he almost dropped out of high school because his family had the opportunity to travel to Paris, I believe, and they were going to be gone for 14 days. This was a trip to visit family, and he felt like it was going to be a great learning experience. Unfortunately, the school that he was at had a policy where if he missed more than 10 days, he was going to be expelled for the semester, which meant he would either have to take summer school, which he usually worked full-time over the summer, so that wasn't really an option, or he was going to not be able to graduate with his class. and they petitioned the principal and the school board, and they did not have any luck. So he went on the trip. He says it was the greatest learning experience of his life. But he came back, and sure enough, he was expelled. He was not allowed to go back to school. So he, had decided that he wanted to just drop out of school. Instead of staying the course, he wanted to drop out of school. However, his English teacher encouraged him. She had seen, so before he left on his trip, he wrote an editorial in the school newspaper about how the school board would not, make this exception for him being gone for 14 days. And so his English teacher told him how good his editorial was, but at the same time, she told him that it could be better. And the same thing with his pictures from his trip. So she praised him on his pictures, but said, but here's where I think you could do better. And she told him that she saw potential in him. She told him that she didn't think he was a quitter, that he was a strong person, and he was too strong to let the administration convince him to quit. So she really saw that potential in him, and she challenged him. And ultimately, that's what made him decide to come back that next semester. And when he came back, this English teacher encouraged him to, join the school newspaper, and they were, working together. They were able to ultimately, get a lot of awards for their school newspaper that year. They won awards over schools. This is a really small school in Montana with limited funding, and they won awards over schools with way more funding in bigger cities that had way better up-to-date tools and resources than they did. So he says she taught us how to think, she challenged us, and she role modeled the way to influence the team to perform with excellence. And she continued to have, year after year, their school newspaper continued to win awards because of her leadership and her ability to challenge her students. Practice number 3 is role model the way. So essentially leading by example. So he says that most people want to be a good role model, but the difference with high performance is they think about this daily. They specifically think about it in relation to how they're seeking to influence others. So they're not doing it just merely to be a good person in general. They also want to influence others, and that is why high performers want to be role models. So they think a lot about how to act so that others might follow them or help them achieve a specific outcome. So he says it's less, I'm trying to be Mother Teresa, and more, I'm going to demonstrate a specific behavior so that others will emulate that exact behavior, which will help us move forward toward a specific result. So this is what we all want, right? We all want to be role models to our teams. We want them to duplicate what we're doing. We want to lead by example, and we want them to see what we're doing, and we want them to want to do what we're doing. So we've got to be doing, our job. We've got to be doing our personal IPA, or reaching out, or following up. And we've got to be, again, just leading by example, showing them what needs to be done to be successful. He says that high performers are laser focused on how they can act in a way that gets someone to improve who they are. So by us leading by example, being role models, we are ultimately helping, our teams to rise up and be the best they can be, helping our team members to improve. So then he goes back to the beginning story about Juan and Daniela. And, the two that were butting heads at the beginning of the story, or the beginning of the chapter, Juan was blaming Daniela for the demise in his company because since he hired her, they kind of had this split where she was showing her vision, casting her vision, and his half of the team was following her, and he was really resistant to that change. So, so he talks about how Brendan went through all of this with Juan. He asked him all these questions about, how can, how do you, okay, so he says, how do you think that Daniela wants you to think about your role, team, and company? He went through this model with the UIM model with Juan and was trying to get him to see from her perspective. And, he says it was hard for him to see this, but he came to find that maybe he was perceiving her attempts at influence as threats rather than leadership. She was being a really good leader, but he didn't see it that way because he was having a hard time putting his ego aside. And he felt like she was just challenging him and the status quo. But really the fact that she was challenging him was actually a good thing. She was trying to raise him up, right? Trying to push him to be a better leader. And so ultimately what happens is they go into their meeting that they were headed to on the plane at the beginning of the chapter. And Juan teaches his team the UIM model. He goes through it with them. He, challenges them and to come up with plans for the future. He implements all these things that Brendan just taught him. And Brendan was in on this meeting, and he says you can tell that the team was surprised by how differently he was addressing them, and they really were eating it up. They really enjoyed that he was treating them this way. And the next thing that Juan did was huge. He asked Daniela to come up to the front of the room. He admitted he was wrong. He shared what challenges he felt. He faced in his own character connections and contributions. So he admitted kind of what he'd been doing wrong. And he asked Daniela to share what she thought, her vision of the UIM model was. And he just sat back and let her lead. He asked her questions. He listened. He praised her throughout. And at the end of her talking, he led the group in a standing ovation for her. And afterwards, she toasted him. It really meant a lot to her. It made her emotional that he, was letting her lead, that he was, having showing his respect for her in front of the whole team and encouraging them to respect her as well. And so that is kind of how that came full circle for Juan. On page 252, he talks about, and I think a lot of us probably feel this way when we talk about influence. It's easy to think that maybe we might be manipulating people, or how do we draw that line between manipulation and influence? We don't want to be manipulating people. That's a negative thing. But he says high performers just don't do that. They don't manipulate people. He says high performers are capable of it, but they don't do it. Because of the way that high performers treat people with respect and dignity, those people, when you are influential over them, they're going to feel trusted and respected and inspired. He says, is it possible to get ahead by manipulating people? He says, of course it is, but usually that's on the short term. Those people that are manipulating people are not going to see long-term success. He says, of those that are successful, most of them are successful because they're role models, not manipulators. He says, of course, there is a lot of dark intent, poor intent, negative intent in our world, but that just gives us the opportunity to be the light. He says, how much focus and effort will we bring to our days to help others think bigger? How many bold challenges will we share to help others rise? So I think that those are the things that we need to, leave here trying to figure out. So how can we help others be bigger? How can we help, others rise up to their potential by challenging them and doing it in a loving, respectful way? So that is the chapter on develop influence. Anybody have anything to add? Sorry, we went a little bit over on time. All right, I don't think anyone has anything. Thanks for sticking with me, guys. I'm loving this book. I hope you guys are as well. Next, we will be going over demonstrate courage. So that'll be our next chapter next week. So see you guys later. Thanks for tuning in.